This is what we need to be pursuing. We need to be looking for feelings. We need to be capturing these magic moments that people string together. I call them the sacred ordinary. These moments that bring us this constant feeding of joy, right? I think where we get confused sometimes is this like pursuit of happiness, which I think most Americans make the pursuit of excitement.
Yes. Thrill.
And right. And what we actually need is that slow IV drip of joy, which is always available to us.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation. Hey everybody, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me here at Warriors at Work. Today I'm bringing you a really beautiful conversation and an important conversation with a highly sought after thought leader, brand builder, and futurist who's also the founder and steward of a fascinating organization called Shine Scout. Lynn Casey is known for her unique ability to spot patterns and connect the dots of emerging sociocultural, digital, economic, and behavioral trends for organizations. She has traveled the world to guide companies as diverse as Mattel, Activision, Facebook, Instagram, Citibank, Estee Lauder, just to name a few. She has keynoted future trends and all of these insights at Abu Dhabi, Oslo, Prague, San Francisco, New York. And she sat down with me and shared her wisdom, her stories. She also talks a lot about this really powerful idea called the Curiosity Quotient. Get your notebook, sit down, find a quiet space, and dig in. Lynn Casey, here you go. There's so much I want to unpack with you. And one of the things that I want to say pretty much out of the gate is a little bit about your background and the work that you're doing in the world that is so, so important. And it's very much aligned to the work that I'm doing. That's why I'm so thrilled to have you here. You're the founder and steward of a fascinating organization called Shine Scout. You use words like cultural cartographer, crafting the vision and building the strategy for brands and companies, which I know we're going to get into that. But you're helping companies create the future. And one of the things that really struck me when you and I first met is how deeply connected you are to this work and this offering to the world, better way to say it. And you're in such alignment. And where I really want to begin is I'd love for you to just take a step back and tell us your story. Like, why this work?
Right. Thank you, Jeannie. And just to go back to the first thing you said, I am so thrilled to be here today because I am so very much in awe and in alignment with the work that you're doing in the world today. Frankly, I think this is the work of the world, and I think everyone's catching up. And we will talk more about that. But why me? And why now? You know, we are in the midst of a 100-year storm. Right? And when we think about what does a 100-year storm mean, it means all these different elements from all these diverse categories, areas, part of the world, something is shifting and changing at the same time, right? That's really the difference between a fad and a trend, right? A trend is one of these sort of seminal shifts where things are moving and changing, those tectonic plate shifts that are happening that impact every aspect of our lives. And that's what's happening right now. And we all feel it, right? That there's something very unsettled, there's something very uneasy, but yet it's so beautiful because we know it takes chaos, right? To sort of crack that egg and to take us into the next evolution of who we are. And I think we've all been waiting for this. And we've all been participating in the warm up to this, right? And so here we are. And change is frightening, change is scary, but change is so necessary for us to
Mm.
be who we can be. And so to take you back, there was a very seminal moment for me when I understood that this was my work. So I was a little baby advertising executive working on Madison Avenue. We were working on a Folgers coffee project, which no one knows what Folgers is anymore. Kids, this is before Starbucks. And so they were trying to launch this sort of hybrid instant coffee that tasted like ground coffee product. So we were doing focus groups and we were in Portland, Maine. And it was so fascinating, Jeannie. So the moderator's in the room and he is asking this woman about her daily coffee. What does your daily coffee taste like? And again, for viewers at home, this is before Starbucks. And she's like, ugh, it's like it's a styrofoam cup and it tastes like, I don't know, hot water that someone stirred with a brown crayon. It's just like, oh, not any good. He's like, all right, well, what's your weekend coffee like? And you watched this woman change before your eyes. She settled back in her chair. She closed her eyes. This little smile like played on her lips. And she said, oh, I'm sitting out in my Adirondack chair. I can smell the cut grass. I can hear the leaves in the trees. I'm holding this chunky ceramic mug one of my kids made, and the coffee just smells so good, and I'm at peace with the world, and it's just one of the most beautiful moments of my life. And I looked around the room, I'm like, no one has mentioned the taste of coffee.
Yeah.
Guys, there's no coffee in this room. And everyone's like, what's wrong with her? I'm like, this is what we need to be pursuing. We need to be looking for feelings. We need to be capturing these magic moments that people string together. I call them the sacred ordinary, right? These,
Ooh.
but they are. Think about your favorite moments, Jeannie. It's the moment you're sitting on your front step and your hand is resting on your dog's head, right? And you're feeling the pulse of his little life next to yours, and the sun is beating down. And it's the sacred ordinary, these moments that bring us this constant feeding of joy, right? I think where we get confused sometimes is this like pursuit of happiness, which I think most Americans make the pursuit of excitement.
Yes. Thrill.
And right. And what we
Mhm.
actually need is that slow IV drip of joy, which is always available to us.
So good. Slow IV drip of joy.
Yeah.
It's the moments. It's the texture of the moments.
Life happens in the hallways, not in the big room,
Mm.
in the hallways. And when I work with these big companies, that's it's sort of like my sacred task is to usher them into those hallways, right?
Yeah.
So that was my big moment where I knew that was my work in the world, was to get anyone that I was working with, anyone that I was assisting, was to introduce them to that emotion, right? To that place of feeling, right? To that, what does it mean to be alive today element of any place that a product intersected with a human being, right?
So beautiful how you describe it, your ability to storytell and relay very connected language to some practicality is extraordinary.
Well, the funny thing is, there are very few products we buy practically, like
Mm.
snow tires. I mean, there are very few products that we buy practically. You know, I always like to butcher "God bless you" and "I'm sorry" Maya Angelou. You know, she has that wonderful expression that people won't remember what you do,
Mhm.
they won't remember what you say, but they remember how you make them feel. That is the absolute fact of brands. That's what brands have to focus on. How do you make people feel?
Mm.
And I see it, you know, I've had the incredible education, Jeannie, in my work. So a lot of my work to get to future trends, to understand future trends, my work is really a weaving together of what are the macro trends happening in the world, and then what are the super granular insights, right? That give us the story behind those trends, right? And so to get there, I have been in conversation with, and I've estimated, I'm using a little Malcolm Gladwellism here, but if it takes 10,000 hours to become a master at something, I have had easily 10,000 conversations with different human beings from every walk of life. And at the end of the day, everyone has a story that will bring you to your knees.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has experienced some loss or is in some state of longing for something, right? And everyone is desperate to be witnessed. And I think that's what we forget. People want to know that their life matters, that their life counts, right? And sitting with people and hearing these stories again and again, it's a mom in Minneapolis sitting in a minivan at 10 o'clock in the evening, crying because of how hard it is to be a mom today, right? Sitting in a coffee shop with a 35-year-old guy who has a wife and a baby, and he thinks he's going to be stuck in this little town in Ohio for the rest of his life. And how did he get here? Like the stories are so similar, and it's this like yearning to be more, yearning to connect more, yearning to feel more, right?
Mm.
And so when I think of where we are right now with AI, with technology, with all the dystopian events happening in our world, I think we're on the brink of realizing that ability to feel more, of realizing a much fuller expression of what it means to be human than ever before. I think it's
Mm.
tremendously exciting. I literally think we're on the cusp of our next phase of evolution.
So something strikes me about, I mean, you've worked with companies like Shiseido, Mattel, Facebook. What's going on in those organizations that cause a pause for them to say, we need to bring in someone to help us do what? Like, is it they're struggling with the future? They're concerned about, are we hitting in the emotion and the heart and the feeling place of our clients? What's going on that prompts someone to reach out to bring in your extraordinary talent?
You're so kind. Typically, what happens when I'm tapped for an engagement is, to put it in the baldest way, we don't know what consumers want. Okay.
Mm.
We're making the thing, we're doing the marketing, we're pitching the thing, and somehow there's a disconnect. So we think we're doing everything right. Obviously something's happening with them, right? So it's an awareness that message isn't hitting market, right? So I'll come in, and it's normally I'm like, well, let's all take a step back. Let's take a look and see what's going on in the world, right? What are the big macro shifts, from a demographic standpoint? Like when we think about your product, who's driving that? Like what is their age group? What is happening to them? Where are they in a life stage? And again, it all comes down to emotions, right?
Mm.
Like when you're 40 and you're in that sandwich generation, right? You're taking care of aging parents, maybe you got kids at home. There's a whole bunch of emotions that are going on there, right? Or if it's a 20 something, right? There's a whole bunch of emotions. So it's like, let's understand, right? The emotional sea that your potential consumer is swimming in, right? So it's making them, and that's where I talk about cultural cartography, because my work is to make maps, right?
Mm.
So when you think about, when you used to go to the mall and you'd be standing there in front of like, where the hell, how do I get to, H&M? And then you find that the map and it's like, you are here, right?
Yeah.
So we always have to start with, you are here, right? So this is where we are. And then we have to look at what's happening in culture, right? I mean, all culture is, we always treat culture like, I think some people think culture is like cool sneakers and like what's the hip jacket, and it's not. Culture is literally an expression of desire, right? What is it that we desire? It's all culture is. So culture is constantly changing and morphing, right? So it's to give them a map to culture and help them understand how to navigate that.
Mm.
And depending on the client, there's lots of different ways of going about doing that. My favorite example is the work that I did with Meta. So what's really exciting about technology companies is they're big believers in fast failing, right? They'll make a ton of stuff. They have the brightest, smartest people in the world working for them. And so they can make a whole bunch of things. But then they have to figure out, do they work? It's very reverse from a CPG company, right? A CPG company does all this testing and it's like, okay, are people excited? We changed the soap from like pink stripes to green stripes. It's not going to work. Like, it's this very slow, laborious process just to make sure that they're not like, tipping over the wheelbarrow here. Tech companies just make the stuff and then they sort of walk around like, does anybody want this? Right. And so with Meta, they had reached this point where they're like, we're doing a lot more. Does anybody want this? And not having it stick. So somehow we're missing something.
Mm.
So we were talking about really, really intelligent engineers from all over the globe who were really committed to their craft. But what that meant, Jeannie, is that they were working 18-hour days in an industrial headquarters with other technologists. So are they making products that serve people? I don't know. They're not in contact with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So when they brought me in and they're like, can you help us understand people, was basically the brief. And I'm like, well, that's a broad brief. Okay. So what I ended up creating was an embed program. And I would take groups of 7 to 9 leaders and we would embed them in small town America. And I would pick a town that had some sort of linchpin event. Like we went to Knoxville, Tennessee, because they were having the Big Ears Music Festival. And we went to Brattleboro, Vermont, because they were having their walking of the steers, right? With cows walking through town. So we would pick these sort of very homey, very Americana type of events, right? And we would embed and we would spend about 4 days. And we would be so busy. We would kick off with an event at a local restaurant and meet the purveyors and the chefs and the owners. And then we would have this whole night together as a team. And then the next day we'd be hanging out with artists, or we'd be out canning blueberries, or we would be refereeing a little league game, or we'd be serving chicken pot pie at a veterans, potluck supper. I kept them embedded in the town, in the community, and no one wanted to go. First and foremost, people were
Sure.
so annoyed. They're like 4 days out of the office, and I had to take 2 planes to get here. And I'm like, I know.
And I'm
Small town.
refereeing a little league game. Like, what am I
Like,
doing?
exactly. What the hell? By the last day, at least half of them would be in tears. They would all feel things they had not felt before. And they really had been able to sort of pierce the fabric of what it means to be in community. Again, the sacred ordinary, what people really prized, right? What they valued. And it was very different than what they had thought, because they hadn't spent this sort of time. They hadn't lived in these worlds, right? They weren't part of a local chapter where, in Brattleboro, if there's a big snowstorm, there's a certain group of people unofficially who then go and bang on the doors of the senior citizens to make sure their heat's on and that they're okay. It's not this like warm, lovely thing. It's just what you do, right? It's how you show up for each other. So these were wildly, wildly effective programs because it did the work for me, right?
Right.
I could have stood in front of them all day and told them how people are and what they value and what they like. I could have done a slideshow. I could have shown little clips.
Right. With all the data and all the metrics and all the
Yes.
science, but
Yeah.
you put them in a place where they actually experienced it.
They felt it.
Mm-hmm.
They felt it. And what I've learned in my work is I believe in quantitative research. I believe in data. I absolutely believe in assembling those facts. But all that is a platform for me to stand on and then tell the
Right.
stories. Because the only thing that changes the hearts and minds of people in a room is an individual story about an individual experience. It's the only thing that changes.
Yeah. You know, I know you're a recognized speaker and an expert on all of these things, and one of the areas that you are talking a lot about is the curiosity quotient, and you told me this great story when we were preparing for this that I'd love for you to retell around your dad said to spend 1 hour a day on ideas. So, take us through this.
Yeah, it's so funny. Again, we're at the cusp of, as I said, it's a 100-year storm. It's a moment
Mhm.
in time that has not happened before. And it's like I say that, and I like the hair on my arm stands up because I'm so excited by it. But yes, it goes back to understanding that we are now being given permission. In fact, we are being exhorted
Mm.
to create, to be curious, to notice, to observe, right? So, so much of the work that we've done in the past, Jeannie, begins with a right? Regurgitate, review, redo, revisit, right? Think about all the tasks that we do every day, right?
Mm.
There, so much of them are these things. The only RE that I think is going to be valuable is the one that has a C in front of it, right? That means create, right? Because all this other stuff is going to be done by technology.
Mhm.
But taking me back to my dad. So my dad was a global marketing director for a major airline. And I was a very important assistant media planner. And we were taking the train home to New Jersey one night, and I was frustrated about something to do with a client. And he said, well, what ideas have you given them? I'm like, ideas? I'm like, do you know? I don't know if you know how much work I'm doing all day, Dad, but like ideas. He said, your number one responsibility to your client is to shut your door every day and put a blank piece of paper in front of you and spend an hour creating
Mm.
something new, thinking of ideas. First of all, I think it's adorable that my father thought I had a door. But this expectation that as a partner for any business, that we're going to bring them someplace new, that we're going to give them, think of the word idea. When I say idea, what happens to you? Do you get excited?
Well,
Right?
my brain immediately goes like this. I go laterally rather than the linear world that I typically operate in.
Tell me more.
Well, the nature of what I do, so I'm working
Mhm.
with executives in all kinds of industries, all kind of functional areas, and what you typically find is that you're having discussion within those functional lines.
Mhm.
Hearing a lot of the usual business vernacular, business competencies, and you're helping them navigate. But when I hear the word idea, it pauses that linear thinking, and it often will take me into more of my life experiences. And I immediately go to more
Beautiful.
textured language rather than the linear transactional language that I have to use in order to relay or talk through something. But the texture is where the meaning is, and where the meaning is where the real expansiveness is.
Exactly.
So it's like
Beautifully
a
put.
catalyst. It's a catalyst for like it's broader ways of being.
Mhm. I mean, an idea is a thought in motion,
Hmm.
right? It has energy to it, right? And so for us to bring energy, for us to move things forward, right? What we need to do is be curious. And you go back and you think about like what we've been given over the years, the templates we've been given to sort of judge our abilities by or other people's abilities by. So, first there was IQ, our
Mhm.
intelligence quotient.
Mhm.
Is that a smart person? But I cannot think of a more subjective term, right? But what's your IQ? Can they think cleverly? Well, we've got machines who can do that at this point, right? I mean, I'm not sure we don't want people who aren't excited by bringing their smartest thinking, but we know that the real heavy lifting of accessing historical thought, accessing analysis, et cetera, is going to be done by AI, is being done by AI, right? So then we move into EQ. right? Well, what's your emotional intelligence? Which is great. I think emotional intelligence is really, really important. But that's not going to get us anywhere. That's not going to get us to the end, right? So if we've got all these machines now running the numbers and doing the work and running the analysis and giving us all these amazing scenarios, like imagine this or imagine that. What's going to drive that? What's going to drive the best use of technology is our curiosity. How might we? What would happen if? Could we? Like that type of thinking, right? That fragmented, disconnected, no holes barred, not worrying about the end result, right? Because that's where the magic happens. It's not thinking about the end result.
Yeah. It's so true. And not thinking about the end result frees people to truly play with the edges. Because if you're always thinking about what's the goal, what's the deliverable, again, let's use all the business vernacular we both see and hear every day. If you remove that and say, let's look at this as a boundaryless space, then what's possible?
It's, when Uber first started, they talked about mobility and access. They didn't talk about cars. They didn't talk about getting from one place to another. Airbnb didn't talk about couches and bedrooms, right? They talked about belonging. Belong
Yeah.
anywhere in the world, right? So again, they went to those intrinsic human desires. And when you start with a desire and you do what you did at the very beginning of our call today, where you're like, what we're going to do is desire mapping. What are all the places that we can intersect with the big throbbing, pulsing desires of humanity today? That's where you're going to win, right? So it's not like, how does this mascara track to that 24-year-old, right? That's going to create such a narrow lane for you. But how does beauty manifest right now for a 20-something? What is beautiful? Like if you go on The Row, you're familiar with the fashion line, The Row.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you go on The Row's Instagram account, you will not see pictures of clothing because that's not what they're selling. You'll see beautiful pictures of a piece of pottery, a gorgeous Italian villa, the picture of the Adriatic Sea. It's these gorgeous, magical places that inspire this sort of feeling of like longing, this surrounding of beauty, right? This just higher level of how we can exist, or the things that we can surround ourselves by, right? That's what The Row is connecting you with. And I think today, more than ever, with AI, with all the shifts, and we can talk about all the macro shifts that are happening right now, but less and less are people defining who they are by what they do. What we're defining ourselves by is what we love.
Yeah, so true. Where do you want to take this curiosity quotient? So how you've just articulated all of that, and there's so much there. What do you want to do? What do you want to bring forward?
I want to teach a course in every single school in the world on the art of seeing, right? How do we see? Teaching people how to notice, right? Giving people that sort of cheat sheet of like, what sort of questions can you be asking that make your world so much more alive and lead you to the biggest possible outcomes, right? Like that to me is teaching people how to see, teaching people how to wonder, right? Like I can spend an hour in an airport without a book or a phone and be fascinated because I'm seeing and I'm noticing, and then I'm putting those together in different stories. Like, oh, well, that person is probably like a heiress from Dallas, and she's on her like third husband, and she's like, I can put an entire story together. And I mean, those sort of magical carpet rides is what we all want. The suitcase brand, Rimowa, are you familiar with them? So they did something earlier in the year, and I wrote about it, and I didn't realize I had hit such a nerve. It was one of my sort of highest response LinkedIn posts, but not because everyone was like, "Oh, I love that." It was a very fragmented response. So Rimawa had started to buy back old suitcases, right? So we're living in this age where people really sort of value secondhand goods,
Mm-hmm.
goods with history, goods with story. And the suitcases that were selling the fastest were suitcases that had all these stickers on them, that were like, Indonesia and Kenya and, Tokyo. So they had these travel stickers on them, and they couldn't keep them in stock, and they were selling for like 4 and 5 times their value. And I just thought this was like so wonderful that people craved to have in their home something that had like had those adventures and had those experiences, like we're sort of imbued with that. Right? It's sort of how I feel when I'm in a consignment shop and I find this like beat up leather jacket, and you reach in the pocket and there's like some concert tickets from, 1989. You're like, oh my God, like the tales this jacket could tell, right? So that's what was, I think, attracting people to these suitcases. And what resulted was this very heated discussion online of people saying, "Oh my gosh, this is so sad that people are cosplaying as adventurers, with these suitcases." And I'm like, are they? Or
Mm.
or are they using them as sort of a platform to stand on to launch their own adventures, right? Or is, because of where they are in the world, whether age or financial circumstances, is this as close to adventure as they're going to get? But it,
Mm.
it fills a longing that they have. It's the same reason people have postcards of Santorini or Paris, as something that they're longing for and that they want to get to, right? But why not? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the root, I'm a big fan of emmetology. If you look at the root of the word desire, it means from the stars, right?
Really?
Yes.
Hmm.
So if our desires come from the stars, right? If it's sort of our looking for and longing for something magical, that's the work every company has to be doing, and that's what people have to be curious about. You're not going to find it in a data dump, right? You're not going to find it in a cluster analysis, right? You're going to find it by understanding and looking for what is it that people love, what brings them alive, what sparks them, right?
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Apologies.
Bless you. We're shifting from an optimization culture to a participation culture, right? We're not trying to like optimize. You remember this feeling with the last 10 years. It's like, ooh, okay, there's,
I'm sorry. That's
oh,
so weird.
please.
You must be saying something that is resonating. That is
Well,
bizarre.
let's remember everyone in the 16th century walked around with snuff so that they could sneeze. It was a
True.
very pleasurable experience for a lot of people.
So can
So,
you go back to that optimization? Say it again. Optimization.
so I would say that we've spent the last 10, I would actually argue from the Industrial Revolution, we've been in a culture that's extremely driven by and rewarded for optimization, right? How do
Mm.
we do things more efficiently? And then it's turned into this whole, particularly during the pandemic, this whole cottage industry of how are we optimizing every hour? Is it cold plunging and a 10-minute breath work? And then I'm having a green drink. And then I'm like, how do I become more and more and more productive? And we've hit a wall. We've hit optimization fatigue because it wasn't making us any happier,
Yeah.
right? So if we've crashed against that wall, and for a whole lot of factors, 20 somethings are very aware of the fact that if they hitch their wagon to a corporation, that's not going to take care of them for the rest of their life, right? And they also understand, because they were the recession babies, they watched their parents lose their jobs, their homes, their cars. They sometimes had to change schools. They're very aware that it's a sum zero game, right? So they're much more interested in using this lifespan to understand who they are. And the way we understand who we are is by experimenting with what we love.
Mm.
And so that's the sort of back door that I guide brands through. It's not this front door of, okay, it's a 26-year-old, they're going to want a house, they're going to want to get married, they're going to want a golden retriever, they're going to want 2 cars in the driveway. It's like, that's not the equation anymore.
Mm.
How do they want to feel? What lights them up? What makes them happy? And what we're seeing is it's community, it's friendship, it's passions and pursuits, it's learning, it's experimenting, and it's loving. So technology is forcing us, I would say it's rewarding us for being the most human that we've ever been.
That is one of the most profound ways I've ever heard anybody describe where we are in the world and also what's possible. And it's a shift in
Big shift.
what you think is happening versus what's actually happening. And I talk a lot about words like intuitive, attunement, because
Mhm.
I believe that that is going to play, and it has already played, but it's going to play even a bigger role in our evolution. And how you just articulated that was really, really beautiful. I'm curious, when you think about your work and the patterns of thinking and feelings that you've seen, what are some of your favorite patterns that you're seeing that you're really looking to promote and expand upon?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many, Jeannie. I honestly think this is, again, despite this dystopian world that we're living in right now, and I can't make light of it. It's a very frightening time to be alive. But what's exciting about it is if I told you that you had 1 year to live, I told you you had 1 year to live. You're healthy. You're not like declining, but
Mhm.
it's 1 year. Would you do things differently?
I would worry a lot less.
Okay. And how would you spend your time?
Not that different than what I'm spending now. I probably would travel more
Mm-hmm.
and be a little bit more indulgent in spending.
Mm-hmm. And would you revel in the moment a little bit more?
Oh, yeah. I would let go of that's why I said a lot of the worry robs me of presence.
Mm-hmm. And would you maybe try more new things? Because what the
Mm,
hell?
yeah.
Okay. We have an entire generation, we have an entire cohort of people who are living with that mindset.
Mm,
The numbers vary, but the last stat I saw was approximately 1 out of 5 of Generation Z don't believe that the planet will be viable for the full extent of their lifetime.
mm,
Okay. So, huh. So, how much time do I really have? Right? This is a generation that, despite the fact that a lot of them are, saving for a down payment, they don't believe that they will own a home, right? They absolutely do not believe that we're working for the same company.
mm,
They estimate they'll have between 15 and 18 jobs, right? And at the end of the day, they're really going to be relying on themselves. So they're sort of entrepreneurs, right? So now you're taking so many musts off the table, right? So they're much more interested in discovering, what do I love? What might be fun? How do I experiment? Right? I think I'll try that. Their definition of their life is not, what do I do? Right? They're trying to figure out, who am I? So there's a pursuit of passions.
mm,
I saw a statistic that said 73% of young people would trade in their Netflix subscription before they would trade in a hobby, right? So they're trying pickle making or ice skating or baking parties or beekeeping. They're really so curious about exploring all the different ways we get to human today, right? Not
mm.
how do I work, but how do I live? And it's so exciting to see what they're doing with that, right? Of course, they know they have to work because there has to be a degree of income, but it's much more in service to, well, I'm going to try to throw this dinner party and we're all going to make like a weird appetizer and what does that look like and how fun might that be, right? Or I'm going off this weekend because someone's having like a line dancing party and we're all going to learn how to line dance, right? So it's this joy and this pursuit of the experience that I think is really, really exciting. And they value belonging, they value participation. They want to find others sort of like, oh my God, like you like one-eyed huskies too? Like, tell me more about that, right? They're joiners. And
Mm.
the smart brands are seeing this and creating what I call choreographed collision. So you and I grew up with the term, serendipitous collision. You and I will walk out of like two opposite buildings and run into each other and like become best friends. Well, we have a generation that grew up on digital. They don't know how to do things in real life, right? But they're really eager to learn. So brands that create this sort of choreographed collision, I don't have to talk to you about like the rise of gaming clubs. And by that, I mean, Mahjong and Rummy Cube, like silly games that everybody can play. But if I show up there and I don't know anyone, I'll be put at a table with three other people, and then someone will explain it to me. And then through this sort of learning and experiencing, I'm going to make new friends, right? I'm going to go to a flower arranging class and we're going to do that. I'm going to join this group that's doing a scavenger hunt throughout my city. Nike's run clubs, they're not about making people run better, right? They're about saying to people on a Tuesday night at 5 o'clock, you're going to meet a bunch of people that might be kind of like yourself, right?
Mm.
So again, this idea of choreographed collision, there's just such a desire to come together, to commune, to learn from each other. And
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't
right?
agree more. Absolutely. People are starving for community, connection, smaller groups, more real
Yes.
conversation.
Smaller groups. Yes. Oh my God, I preach this all the time, right? Help me find my tribe. Give me a small, bite-sized group of them and
Mhm.
let me connect in a safe space where I can learn about myself and maybe make a friend.
Right.
The millennials grew up in real life, right? So these things didn't show up until they were about 14 or 15, right? So they jumped into digital because it was exciting and fun, but they did it collectively. That was Facebook, right? That was like, hey, 300 of my friends, help me choose my prom dress, right? It was used in a very different way.
Mhm.
Gen Z grew up with these. So what's exciting for them is the opposite, right? Ooh, what would it feel like to go on a picnic with a bunch of people, right? How might I connect if, right? How do I do this in real life? That's what they're hungry to explore, the world that they didn't have growing up. So I'm so excited about this yearning, this push to be human, to move into what it really means to, as you discussed before, the sort of lateral. What are the textures? What does that smell like? What does that feel like? What does
Mm.
that taste like? Because we have to focus on what can technology not do for us?
Yes.
Those things. So our skills, the things that we are going to be prized for, are our human qualities. It's curiosity, right? It's sensorial,
Mm.
right? It's intuitive. It's emotional. So
Empathy.
empathy 100%, but empathy is an equation. Okay? Empathy is an equation, Jeannie. Curiosity plus vulnerability equals empathy.
Mm.
We don't just get there. I have to be curious about you. Then I have to be vulnerable enough to show you something about myself, to allow you to show me something about yours. Right? So we're sitting on the brink of the dawn of the greatest expression of humanity that I think we've ever had. And it's going to be exciting.
That leads me to my final question. The way you just set that up is so beautiful. So, asking someone like you who spends all of your time in the world of being in the future, look out in your future.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see and how have you had impact?
Mm. The most powerful thing people can say to me after I've given a talk or run a workshop is they're like, "You're the first person who has shown me a future that I can be excited about."
Mm.
And I always joke that it would be really bad to be a futurist who didn't believe in the future, you know, kinda tricky for the work there, but we have to be optimistic. We
Mhm.
have to be optimistic, and I believe human beings, it's baked into our DNA. You know, we want to be alive, right? We want to live, and we want to live in the best and most beautiful way possible. So that's the through line I'm always looking for, right? There's plenty of things that will tell us otherwise, but when people are like, "Oh, we've never lived through times like this," I'm like, can you imagine? Can you imagine being a 30-year-old woman in 1940 in London? Okay. You've come through the Depression, you've come through World War One, you've come through all the cholera and typhoid and death and destruction of all of that. And you're taking a really big breath and you're like, wow, we've been through the worst of it. And we know that World War II is right around the corner,
Mm.
right? But those people survived and thrived and changed the world. Class structures fell. Women gained so much more power and ability, right? The world shifted and changed. You know, the UN was created. Like so much good came out of so much evil, right? And so I look at where we are right now and I'm like, we're capable of so much magic. And now we have the tools to free us up from task orientation and allow us to shift into dreaming, into imagining, into like the alchemy of what it means to be human today. So um, when someone finishes hearing me, or like I said, participating in a workshop, or wrapping up a research project and seeing their excitement, right, seeing a gleam in their eye, seeing ideas, seeing the sense that they can create something new, um, that's the impact I've longed for, and that keeps me excited about the work that I'm doing.
The word that's coming to mind is you are such a spark.
I love that. I love that.
And I am so grateful that you are doing this work in the world. This conversation has been so fascinating to me, and I just feel so excited about the possibilities of where you're going to take your work, and all of the people that you just spoke to that are in my universe. I know that they're going to leave this conversation feeling inspired, but also excited about, well, I can play with that and I can push that forward and I can ask more questions. I don't necessarily need to just subscribe to this transactional way of being. There's so much more if I just lift my head up, look around, and ask more questions.
It's all we have.
Yeah.
All we have. Anything that we have been taught that's functional and practical is going to be obsolete, right?
Mm,
So the only thing we can be sure of is the power of our own imaginations.
yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Lynn, thank you so much for sharing your heart, your wisdom, and your mind in this conversation.
Well, thank you, Jeannie, for the work that you're doing and for inspiring and reminding people, to work from their intuition, like to trust their own internal magic, because that's going to be our strongest guide for our best and most powerful future.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniekumbert.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.